Thanks for joining, everybody. This is the September 15th edition of the EPPAC meeting. I hope everybody had a nice summer. We haven't met since June, and a lot has happened since then. But we wanted to come back today and share some of the key efforts that have been underway through the utilities and also the bulk needs assessment work stream that's been underway with BPS, NYSERDA, and our consultant. If you'll remember back to our discussion back in June, this bulk needs assessment was the result of some of the actions taken in the CGPP order, where the order recognized that some of the modeling frameworks might not be ideally set up to show all the potential benefits of bulk needs and bulk transmission solutions in the model. So they tasked, the order tasks DPS, NYSERDA, and a consultant to go check the model and work with stakeholders to see if there are other values on the system for potentially exploring new bulk expansion opportunities as well, in addition to the local opportunities that the utilities will be working to develop. So that process kicked off back in June, and in one previous meeting we discussed the concept and the process for bulk solutions. Back in June, we also solicited feedback from stakeholders on an EPPAC meeting discussing, some high value locations, what the results from the capacity expansion model were saying, what the results that folks had interpreted from past NYSO outlooks had said, to try to get all the best feedback from stakeholders on key areas of the system to identify. We're happy to report that we've done quite a bit of work with our consultant Quanta in the meantime, evaluating some of those opportunities and looking at the system as it exists today and how it may exist in the future. And we have some information to share with you all today. We also have a presentation from the utilities after that to discuss the work that's been ongoing in stage 3 and some of the future work in stages 4 and 5 that'll hopefully get everybody back up to speed and get ready to interact a bit more throughout this fall and winter time, and make sure everybody's in a really good position to review final outputs of this product early next year. So before we jump in, are there any questions about the process today or what we're going to discuss? Okay, great. So in that case, I think I'll turn it over to John at NYSERDA just to give maybe a quick overview before we hand it to Quanta to share some slides on the bulk needs assessment.
Yeah, thank you, Skylar. Just as Skylar already noted, NYSERDA has engaged Quanta for assistance in the bulk needs assessment as in accordance with the CGPP order. Today, Quanta will be presenting some conceptual information about solutions that they are taking a look at in terms of the bulk needs assessment. And I just want to note that there will still be some opportunity to refine some of these concepts, and that we are presenting them, at a fairly conceptual level. So please keep that in mind with questions as we go through. Rahul, are you? Can you just make sure you're able to speak okay here?
Sure. Hey, John. Can you folks hear me okay?
Yes, we can. And Rahul, are you going to be able to throw slides up, or would you like me to do that for you?
Yes. Let me actually try to throw the slides up, John, in case I run into any issues. I need some help.
Looks great.
Yeah. Yep. Perfect. Okay. I think I'm all set, John. Whenever we're ready to hand off.
Yep. No. You can go ahead to the first slide there.
Okay. Excellent. Perfect. So welcome and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. As John pointed out earlier, so this presentation really focuses on the development of the conceptual bulk solutions under the CGPP framework. Really, the focus is a little bit more on walking you all through the methodology, the concepts that we've evaluated and continuing to evaluate. That's the key word here, and also discuss some of the next steps. Now, just in terms of a quick background and recap. So this presentation really builds upon the prior discussions from the June 2nd EPPAC meeting, where really the overall process at a very high level was discussed. And it's important to note that we've drawn from a lot of different sources of information that we've received. One is, of course, the capacity expansion results from the stage 1 CGPP, a lot of good written feedback from the EPPAC representatives, submissions that were received in response to the 2024 solicitation by NISO, a lot of long-term studies that were recently concluded, the 2023-2042 outlook in particular, recent transmission congestion patterns and things that we've more generally been observing and hearing. And also, some more kind of expandability analysis that we initially kind of embarked on to help guide a lot of this. Very quickly again, just to help kind of focus the purpose of all of this. The purpose of this presentation is really threefold, and one is to share the high-level concepts that we are currently considering. Then highlight more regional transfer strategies that could help address some of the constraints that we have begin observing, and also to lay the foundation for any future refinements and more detailed analysis that we intend to embark upon. We are looking for more generalized conceptual level feedback from the EPPAC members, really one focusing on really the validity and the direction that we are taking with a lot of these solutions that we are exploring. Let me say concepts that we are exploring, and key consideration of gaps that we might have missed along this process. So going to the next slide, and sorry, I'm just trying to figure out how PDFs work with multiple screens, but okay. So trying to really categorize our view of like these concepts into, let's say, 3 buckets. We have a west to east corridor concept, which is really the west strengthening the flows from zones A to C towards zone G. We have an extension of that concept, which is really continuing the bulk transfer down into zone J, which is where our load is all concentrated. We also have a north to south corridor where we're really looking at 2 alternatives. One is more targeted reinforcements through the northern New York areas of concern, zone D and E. Also looking at potentially what a new bulk pathway might look like if we directly wanted to get through from zone D into zone G, kind of paralleling all of the existing paths. Now, fully recognizing that, there is also going to be a need for a more targeted or integrated corridor concept, which really combines the elements from the west to east corridor and the north to south corridor. What is that going to look like to create a statewide solution? So that's really what the integrated corridor concept is exploring. Now, just to set the stage on the studies that were and are going to be performed. So it's important to level set that the goal is not to test solution ideas in particular, but more representative future system conditions, and not to really simulate any precise future outcomes. So to test these ideas, we're using power flow studies. And of course, the key items are the steady state analysis, voltage stability, and thermal transfer, really focusing on monitoring all the lines 100 kV and above, and really running through all of the system contingencies, fully acknowledging that there is a little bit of a back and forth that's happening with the local plans and their integration into the bulk plans. But I think the key aspect was not to really isolate the 2 systems, so we understand the impact of anything that we are exploring on the combined network. Now, with that being said, and again, if there are questions, apologies, I'm not able to kind of see any of that. So I'm going to request somebody else to kind of stop me if something like that comes up.
Yep, I'll do that, Rahul. And we actually, right as you were saying that, we got our first hand up in the chat. So I'll try to moderate that. I have Radhika in the chat.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yep.
Hi, Radhika.
Awesome. I thought to ask the question before you go into the specific solution ideas.
Sure.
You noted the power flow analysis, so I'm curious, like what year of analysis and like high level, what does representative future system condition mean?
Sure. No, thanks for that question, Radhika. And so We've started our analysis with the most recent FERC 715 cases and really picked the outer years, which reflect all of the clean path and all of those approved upgrades within the models. We've adjusted the generation at the zonal level, really informed by the CGPP state scenario, and then conducted a transfer analysis, right? So it's really the balancing of that generation that's happening at an interzonal level and a statewide level that we're accomplishing through the transfer analysis.
Sorry if I'm missing. Are you saying that you have added generation or you are doing transfer analysis? Sorry, I'm just not clear on the last point about the generation in the models.
Sure. We have adjusted the generation in the model, Roika, but at a more zonal level to really be informed by the CGPP state scenario. So the generation has been adjusted at a zonal level, not really gone down to the specific nodal level, because our focus again is on the bulk transfers and those implications.
So is this analysis power flow nodal analysis, or is it more like, is it like zonal?
It's a power flow nodal analysis, Roika. Thank you for the question. Yeah.
And so just in terms of like adding generation, is it like adjusting the existing generation to certain amounts? You noted like zonal generation, but how do you add it to the models other than at specific nodal points?
So it is scaling up the existing generation that is in the models, Radhika,
Okay.
but also factoring in the more late stage generation projects that are in the most recent class year 23 and all that, which were actually already embedded within the FERC models. So it's really adjusting the existing generation for purposes of this exercise.
Okay, so you scaled up the existing generation now. Okay.
Correct.
And okay, I will stop here. I have another question, but can be asked later. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Radhika.
We got one more question in chat. Go ahead. Babatunde?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. You mentioned that you were testing ideas. I was wondering if you can provide more details on that. What do you mean by testing ideas?
Got it. No, thanks for that question, Babatunde. And over the next few slides, we'll kind of get into some of those details.
Okay. Follow up. You also mentioned that you assumed, or the model, claim parties in the model. Can you confirm that, please?
Yes, I can confirm that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I think we're good now. I'm going to work to get Nick unmuted, but we'll have one more question in a second.
Oh, sorry, apologies. I need to quickly correct on the last comment. Yeah, sorry, John. I think you were going to do that. Yeah, I meant to say the smart part connect is in the model. My apologies. Yeah.
And let me just try to follow up on that. As Rahul noted, anything that was in the FERC 715 cases was included. And then there was scaling done to have the generation be commensurate with the state scenario to clear up the cases. So just making that clear before you go forward with your follow-up question. And then a note for you, Skylar, we also have Keith in the queue in addition to Nick.
Great, thanks.
Yep.
Okay, just to confirm, claim part is not in the model.
That's correct. Yeah, if it was not in the FERC 715 models, it was not included in.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Keith.
Yeah, thanks, Skylar. I keep on pulling that line of questioning that Radhika started here, and I think, John, you tried to clarify it a moment ago. Let me try to take a different angle on this question on the generation that was included. And so how I'm understanding the answer, John or Rahul, is you took the FERC 715 cases and you scaled up the generation. So for example, there's certain land-based wind or solar or battery projects in those models in certain zones that is not going to be including the capacity expansion build out that was done in stage 1 and implemented by the utilities in the stage 3 power flow. So there was a lot of scaling done. At least that's what it sounds like to me. So can you confirm that that understanding is correct? And if it's correct, then is the statement that the generation placement done by the utilities in stage 3 to add the resources for from the capacity expansion into that power flow analysis, that was not included in this study? Thanks.
That is correct, Keith. And John, anything more that you'd like to add to that? That this is an exercise where there was scaling done of only the existing generation, and there was no other additional generation that was added on a more nodal basis based on what the utilities have identified.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. That's helpful to understand what was done here. Can you comment at all, or maybe you have a slide on this later so I can hold the question? Was this was done in transfer limits? Was the transfer limits done, were you trying to source then from the scaled renewable generation? Or so how was the, I guess, let me ask a broader question. How was the source and sinks defined at a high level here?
Got it. So what I'd say to that, Keith, is at a very high level, you can think of it as this being the source and this being the sink. For purposes of this exercise, depending on the corridor path that we are looking at, we did also pay attention to kind of within the zones if you had source and sinks like A to B and then B to C. So the pathway of constraints that we have identified, and we have a limited list of those on these slides, but also end to end what we are trying to solve for kind of covers that bucket.
Thank you for that clarification.
Okay.
Okay, Nick, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, thanks, Skylar. And thanks, Rahul. So,
Thanks.
question: is Zone K covered elsewhere, or how will Zone K be covered? Zone K to the rest of the state?
No, thanks for that question, Nick. And so we are monitoring Zone K more broadly as part of our analysis, especially as we are kind of focusing on bringing all of the generation and the basically moving all this generation into downstate where the load centers are. So we are monitoring Zone K, and so potentially as an outcome, if there are constraints identified, there will be transmission solutions identified to resolve it. But in terms of defining the transmission concepts, the focus is more kind of in the upstate and the downstate direction. That's why you might just see Zone J a lot more often. But we are monitoring, and there is going to be a look into Zone K as well and the transfers between these two zones.
Okay, and the transfer analysis, is that going up to a set value or just finding the limit? Like, are you aligning with like the capacity expansion model in any way?
We are. So we're kind of being informed by the CGPP state scenario. So to the extent we have this megawatt quantity of generation that we have as targets upstate that we are trying to deliver downstate beyond all of the load that's being served upstate, we are using that as a reference point.
And you go, okay, and you're going all the way out to 2042, like the full scope of CGP?
So we are trying to go as far out as we can, and so that's something that we do plan to consider, which is go as far out as like the 2040 generation levels, and so that's an intention of the analysis as well.
Okay, yeah, we can table our talk on the side as well if necessary, but I would implore it to consider limitations from Zone K to the rest of the state. We are observing kind of limitations, especially 2042 build outs, in particular for scenario 3. Where it likely warrants, consideration for additional interties, and that goes above and beyond PB10.
So Nick, let me respond to that a little bit. So I want to be clear here. In looking, we looked at things on a statewide basis and took into account previously received feedback in looking at corridors to dig into further. Out of that work, what Rahul has here on the screen is based on the analysis that has been conducted and incorporating the feedback that we had received previously, a subset of constraints that that Quanta's team has looked at conceptual solutions to address. So not seeing something on this list doesn't mean that it wasn't looked at in the analysis in any way, shape, or form. it does mean that we have not yet to this point looked at a conceptual bulk solution to address any of those constraints. And so we could take the feedback to look more closely at Zone K, but I just want to be clear. In terms of looking at constraints and identifying areas to focus on, because we do have a limited ability to develop and test conceptual bulk solutions, we have not identified that as one we were pursuing at this point, but we can have a side conversation or look at things more deeply based on feedback we get today on that front.
Yeah, sure. That sounds like a good plan, John. And thanks. I appreciate that additional context and kind of like the flexibility of kind of working towards identifying additional needs than what we see here in front of us. I'm a little surprised that it wasn't identified in the analysis done so far, but maybe that's a product of methodology.
Well, I would say I think it's a matter of are these the only constraints that we're seeing in the analysis? I would not say yes. Were these the constraints that we zeroed in on for the purposes of this exercise? Because I want to be clear, we are not going to be able to look at a significantly large set of conceptual bulk projects that we can advance into stage 5. There's just practical limitations on that.
And I want to jump in on that exact point, John, is that for those constraints that are showing up in the 2040 to 2042 timeframe, we've been prioritizing the slightly earlier ones and moving through the process that way because, we're strapped for time. And so if the key output of the CGPP process as a whole is to give the commission investable information on things they can decide on immediately to invest in, the earlier information is kind of more pertinent to a action that might happen next year than a solution that we find, being an issue in 2042 because of load growth out then. So we're trying to prioritize these near term ones if there's additional time or if there's additional ability to incorporate later years into those investigations as well. We're going to do that. But it's just that there's been this prioritization because we have limited budget, limited time, and trying to get these nearer term ones in there first. But definitely, as John said, this is not the full set of all potential constraints, and definitely have seen a lot of that 2042 information. Scenario 3 with all those loads downstate definitely causes a lot of interesting issues.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, Skylar. And thanks, John.
Going back to the list, we have 3 more hands up. Julia. I see you put your hand down. If you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I put my hand down, but I didn't unmute. Hi, thank you. I have a 2-part question following up on Babatunde's around CleanPath. So you mentioned that CleanPath is not included because it was not in the FERC model, but it was in the state model, and obviously a lot has happened since June. So first off, have those assumptions changed since June, and have other assumptions changed? And then the second part of my question is, will this model then be used to inform the NISO? I guess I'm a little confused about the integration between this modeling and the NISO bulk solicitation modeling and how those are going to interplay moving forward.
Yeah, I can take the second one first and then go back to the first. So the way this interacts is through the CGPP, we're trying to look at all these potential solutions and look at the results from the CGPP we have so far, interpreting them through the lens of this new world we're living in, where a lot of those assumptions probably are not going to pan out exactly as they showed up in the model, and then have the commission be as informed as possible when we file this report with all of these solutions and the synergy report and the stage 5 assessment, picking where the model is helping to pick which one of these are more valuable. And then at that point, the commission would have the ability to evaluate those results and identify a potential public policy transmission need. And at that point, it would proceed through the typical NISO bulk needs process. but there's no real overlap today. Like we're not determining anything for the NISO here today. You know, they haven't told us we have to do something here. This is just part of the modeling. And so back to the way that interacts with your
Okay.
first question, we are kind of stuck. You know, the modeling from the initial stage 1, where we went through that months long capacity expansion model development process, where we all provided input to the assumptions and we ran the model. Nothing in those modeling results has changed, but the world has changed around it. So, for example, our state scenario has tons of hydrogen combustion. It has the New York City PPTN. It has more than 9 gigawatts of offshore wind. It has clean path in there. And so that's something that we're trying to, through our modeling in the later stages, we have to use what we have from those models and then use either interpretations of those results or tweaks to the secondary models themselves, like the power flow models and the other models we're using, tweak those in a way that makes the world of today more represented in the model, because it would not be very good planning, a very good planner exercise, or very useful to the commission to build up bulk solution options that assumed clean path was going to be there if it's actually not moving forward anymore. And so that's one of the things, like in this bulk assessments model, we had to make that decision to not keep pushing forward that specific assumption that was in the state scenario modeling in stage 1, but is not happening anymore. So we're just not flowing it through. That has other implications though, and that's something that we and hopefully stakeholders who've been able to pay attention and staying up to speed and reviewing the final report will have to help us and the commission like interpret all of these things, because it's extremely complicated when you have these capacity expansion results that say one thing based on an optimization of something that might not actually be true anymore. But we don't have any new updated information. We're going to be using both these new models that are different model sets. They're not capacity expansion models anymore. They're power flow models. They're other types of models that might help inform us as to how the world has changed. But we're also able to rely on things like the NISO's updated outlook studies, the NYSERDA and state energy plan modeling, those types of things that might have slightly different assumptions than CGPP did, to try to build around this whole universe of results so that we can interpret what we're seeing in light of all the changes that have happened over the last 3 to 6 months. So it's not that we've like changed our minds or like changed assumptions. It's that we're trying to update and almost correct for the ways that our initial modeling that was locked down a year and a half or 2 years ago, update that so we're still providing the commission with as relevant information as possible. Did you have any follow-ups on that? I know that I just talked for a really long time.
No, that's really helpful. I guess just, and maybe this has happened and I just haven't clocked it, but has this group seen the list of updated assumptions that we're trying to, finagle into the new results?
That's a good question. I'm not sure we've like tracked specifically the ways that we've had to update the power flow analysis. I think the main ones have been related to clean path and the PPTN. That's the main thing we've had to kind of keep in mind as we've been running through the bulk needs assessment. I think most of the utility modeling that they've been doing, and they can answer this in their presentation later, but I think most of the utilities modeling was started before a lot of these changes, and so they're kind of already proceeding without many of these updates. And so that's another way we're gonna have to coordinate with them and stakeholders to make sure that we keep all of the different modeling frameworks and the way the assumptions might be different, keep them all in perspective.
Okay, that makes sense. Sorry, I have one more follow-up. Clean path PPTN totally makes sense. Has there been any changes on nuclear modeling?
I actually don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think any change has been made there. We have one of the 3 main scenarios that's been moving this whole time through this process is the second scenario 2 that we're moving through here has, I think, 3 or 4 gigawatts of nuclear by 2042 in the model. And so that kind of shows, a quote unquote, nuclear style scenario. I mean, the characteristics of that defer that was in that scenario are not explicitly designed to be nuclear. They could be a number of things, but the way the model sees it is basically how it would see nuclear. So I think we're covered in terms of having some model results that interpret what having additional nuclear power upstate would look like. So I think we have some information to work with there.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we have one more hand, Babatunde.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to second a point that Julia made. It would be great to have a list of all the new assumptions. And also, I think there might be, I know things have changed, as you rightly mentioned. I think there might be a room for doing sensitivity to some of those items that you mentioned that are not certain, or that are maybe the general perception is not as certain as it was 6 months ago. And still on that, could you touch on the assumptions around hydrogen and also wind in Zone J?
Sure. So these model results that we're building the powerful off of did not assume like a reduction or increase in the usage of hydrogen or offshore wind. We are basically reliant on a lot of the modeled outputs. And so that's another case where these results will have to be interpreted in a way that makes it more useful to the commission, knowing that some of the energy that the capacity expansion model and some of these powerful models are assuming will be flowing might not be flowing for 3 or 5 or 10 years later than we were initially expecting when we got these model results. So that's a definitely something to track and make sure, you know, to keep your eyes on and our eyes on when we're seeing these results. You know, interpreting them to make sure they're still valid in many different futures. That's why we had at least 3 scenarios running through this this whole process, is to make sure that, you know, one scenario that might have more hydrogen downstate, one that has less or almost none downstate, those have to be interpreted together to make sure we know which needs arise under which scenarios, and make sure we're not just building or suggesting building something that is only used in, you know, a very small subset of scenarios, or a subset of unlikely scenarios, for example. I think based on what you and Julie were saying, I think that does make sense to have maybe a equivalent assumptions matrix. You know, we had developed that for the capacity expansion models, and it's basically, I would say 90+% of that is going to be exactly the same in this, but there's just been kind of the key things that impact the bulk transmission network had to be updated, just so we're not forcing impossible or unlikely solutions into this next phase of work. But it will be helpful, I think, based on, you know, the comments we're hearing today. I think that would be helpful to write down some of those things and send them out around to the group. So that's a good suggestion. Thanks. Shadab, go ahead.
Thanks, Skylar. I think you already answered my question about the assumptions, but I do have a follow-up, and I'm trying to wrap my mind around this whole process. So basically, the assumptions have changed so much, and we are not updating our assumption in this process. Then what are we going to do here? And particularly, I don't think the bulk need from this process, I think that needs to be redone, basically based on the new assumptions. So what do you see the outcome of this? But that is not a small stuff, right? That whole New York PPTN is out, and that will implicate the assumptions about the storage, long-term storage, and all that. That has a pretty big implication on the bulk needs.
Right. So the load is the same, and so we know we need to get power where we need to get it. We also know that the targets have not changed, and that's been the primary marching orders in the CGPP, you know, directed by AREGBA, that we need to develop a plan that identifies all the grid needs tied to achievement of the CLCPA, not find the grid needs for some other future, that a more likely future where we don't quite hit it, but it makes more sense. We're trying to do both now. We've realized very early on that we want to do more sensitivities. We want to get not just informational results that show the commission what might be needed to get to 2040, which is kind of the purpose of a REGBA and the design of the CGPP, but we want to get actionable, investable intelligence also about the range of possible near and long-term futures. And so you're making a really good point that we want to make sure that all the analysis we're doing is valid under a number of possible futures, and that's why we've updated many of the some of the more important assumptions, like the PPTN and the Clean Path New York going away. We did not incorporate those, even though they're in the capacity expansion model. We did not flow those through into the bulk needs assessment, because that has a huge impact on how the power would be flowing in downstate New York. And we want to make sure that what comes out of here is more realistic and tied to what's actually going to happen over the next 5 or 10 years. In the long term, I totally agree with you. The 2040 to 2042 timeframe, the model results showed huge development of hydrogen and offshore wind and energy storage downstate, especially in scenario 3. But I think one of the things we're trying to prioritize here is, like I said before, the slightly earlier needs, the 2030, 2035 needs, and then as we need to start building on those to go all the way to 2040 and 2042 when those big changes are occurring. But in this near term, I think the results across the scenarios, and the utilities showed this in one of their previous presentations, out to 2035, most of the scenario buildouts look pretty much exactly the same. Virtually identical levels of storage, wind, solar, load, all that stuff. And so kind of targeting that focus on 2035, where the load forecast and the generation buildout are very similar across all scenarios, has allowed us to build a very, I think, actionable and realistic model of the bulk transmission system, using the most updated information from the FERC filings to try to run some of these results. It's really in those later stages where the 3 scenarios really start diverging, and we start running into those really tight constraints with the reality of today and the achievability of some of those more stringent targets without having federal support for some of those things, especially offshore wind. And so I think in this near term, we're a little bit how do I want to say that? I think we're a little bit protected, we're a little bit insulated in those first 5 to 10 years because the model results are very similar, and we're going to be able to present actionable information. In the long term, if we tried to come out with one set of results that said this is what we need to buy in 2042, I don't think that would be worth all that much, because the world has already changed a lot and is going to change even more over these next 17 years. So we're trying to keep it to this very actionable near term model set to get something that the commission can take action on next year.
Oh, this is very helpful. So basically, this is 2035 model analysis, and this does not have the offshore wind in your PPTN, right? Is that correct?
Right.
Okay, that's very helpful. One thing I would offer, Skylar, is I understand 2040, 42 is far out. While we are coming up with these bulk ideas, I think we should right size these ideas to meet 2040 needs as well. Just be mindful of that. Maybe 2035 will say you need whatever 1 circuit of this capacity, but once you pan it out to 2040, 42, that will tell you something else, right? So I think it's important to make sure, and I think that kind of also matches with what 1920 the FERC is looking for, right? The long-term planning. So I think, to me, this is like a no regret scenario. You know that in 2035, you're not going to have all these offshore wind. You're going to do the bulk solution, but right size those solutions to meet 2042 need as well.
I think that's a great point. I think we need to keep all this in perspective and make sure we're not making decisions that will only turn out to be relevant in one possible future. We're trying to make decisions on projects that have multiple values, are relevant under many possible futures, and are, like you said, either right-sized or expandable, making sure they're capable of getting us to where we need to go ultimately. I saw Liz come off mute for a second. Liz, did you want to jump in and clarify something?
Very, very briefly, just to remind everybody that this is a cyclical process, which is just to underscore this, the sort of uncertainty bounding that we're talking about here.
Right. Yep. It's been a very difficult process. Okay, I'm gonna wrap up with these last two hands, and we got to move forward. We're 42 minutes in, and we haven't started the presentation on the the actual results yet. So, just want to move things along, and we can take some more questions later. Next in the chat is Xia.
If he's speaking, he's muted.
Yeah, if you might be on mute.
Hey, good afternoon. This is Xiajuan at NIPA. I have a quick question about offshore wind modeling in Zone J. How do you model them? Do you respect the 9 gigawatt by 2035 the goal? And also previously discussed, you're scaling up existing generator, right? We know Zone J probably only have one in the Focus 715 case. So how did you do the scaling? So can you help to answer?
John or Rahul, did you want to take that one?
Sure, I can quickly comment on that, and John, please feel free to chime in. So again, Jia, thanks for the question. The way that we ran the analysis was not focused on the targets of individual types of technologies within these zones. It was mostly the total generation capacity within that zone, which we thought, given the discussion earlier by Skylar, was sufficient for like the 2035 timeframe we were focusing on to identify bulk system needs. So yeah, so that's how we've approached it right now. Anything to add to that, John? Skylar?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, as a reminder, that when Rahul is referring to that scaling, it is being done to the level of the results of the capacity expansion model. It's being focused on ensuring that on a zonal level, the full amount of generation, both existing and coming out of the capacity expansion model, are represented. So at those levels that we saw in previous presentations for stage one. And in Rahul's last note, for the purposes of that snapshot transfer analysis to identify constraints, the particular type of generation is not as important as the amount of transfer being sought on that zone to zone level. And I'll just say, I think we are happy to take more detailed questions, either later or offline in terms of the modeling. But as Skylar noted, we do need to move forward to actually be able to present you with the concepts and get your feedback on that, as well as provide sufficient time for the utility presentation that's also scheduled for this meeting. So I think if there's more, I guess I'm just saying, if there's more like in the weeds questions, I'm not trying to put them to the side, but if we can take those maybe later or offline to address them for the sake of time, it might be useful.
Okay, thank you, very helpful. But I just have a really quick question is, when you put all this generation, up to, their capability, right? How are you able to solve? Because there's a lot of generation added to the entire state, right? But your load doesn't have so many. So I'm happy to talk offline if have to.
Yeah, I think at this point, and Skylar, if you're open to this, if folks have further detailed questions on the modeling and assumptions, if they could just send those and we can look at responding to them.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, we can send written responses on those. That'll be a lot easier to answer the more direct questions right now. So I think we'll move on with the presentation and try to get through the 3 or 4 concepts here. So make sure we leave time to give everybody an update on what the utility's been working on, and then come back to questions at the end.
Sounds good. No, thanks again, Skylar. So yep. we've discussed the background slide, and now at a very high level, just looking through all of the transmission concepts that we discussed, the first one is really looking at a west to east corridor, which is really strengthen the transfer capability from the more upstate rich zones into zone G, which serves as kind of a key interface to downstate load centers. So the way that we've identified these, and we'll kind of break into these slides, these are not, again, all of the constraints, but they are a subset of the observed constraints that we had in these areas. And so the solutions that are really being designed are to address these constraints and also help kind of unbottle or relieve some of the key interfaces like the Tyson-Juries, the West Central, and all of those, the Marcy South, Central East, all along that pathway. And you'll see that as we go through all of the different constraints and all of the different high-level concepts, right? And so here in the southern tier area, we have the Oakdale area, the Gardenville to Stony Road corridor, the Jennison to Cattleville corridor, all of these showing up as constraints amongst several others. And so in terms of the concept for a transmission solution, we were really looking at combination of greenfield as well as reinforcements along these corridors. And really what the bubbles are meant to represent are mostly locations where there will likely be termination points across this solution corridor. And so this type of a transmission concept helps improve the west to east corridor transfers, focusing between zones A to C to get into zone G, enabling more of the renewables and the generation that's being built upstate to directly transfer into zone G. Now, what I'll also say is that extending this transmission concept a little further, we also explored a connection from zone G to zone J directly. And so this is to further enable more of the generation that we are unbottling with this solution up until zone G to have a direct pathway into zone J. Now, a good way to think of this is also when we get to the slide of the integrated solution, you can see how this overlays with our more integrated kind of solution for the statewide concept. I apologize, I know I'm rushing past this a little bit quickly in the interest of time, but feel free to kind of chime in. Now, very quickly talking about another transmission concept, which is really the north to south corridor. Over here, the focus is a little bit more on the constraints that are up in North Country. We've got the Coffeen area, the North Country area, and the Adirondack corridor, fully recognizing that, hey, there are local constraints as well that need to be resolved, but there's also this broader challenge of moving all of this generation directly into downstate. And so one way to visualize that is to really look at a solution where you're making more targeted reinforcements along the existing pathway in northern New York to really try and bring it all down into zone C and then connect it to a more integrated transmission concept. Another alternative that we're exploring over here is really going directly from North Country into zone G, which is really a north to south pathway, which is creating completely kind of independent corridor to achieve the same. Now, when you think about the two transmission concepts that we discussed, a key question is, what is an integrated corridor going to look like? Because if you just unbottle everything into zone G and build one corridor from G to J, is that really going to solve everything? So when we're thinking about a more combined integrated corridor, we are looking at a solution where we're really looking at two alternatives here. One is combining the merger of what we presented earlier for North Country, which is the more targeted reinforcements, along with a bridge between everything that we unbottle here into the A to C and G to J corridor. So it's really building out this whole concept so that it benefits the overall architecture of moving all of the upstate and the western state kind of generation into downstate New York. And we also have another alternative here, which is really looking at the concept of a parallel path between upstate and within North Country directly into zone G, and then leveraging the connections that we're building in the west to east direction to tie into zone G as a more collection kind of corridor system to directly deliver into zone J. Now, I'm going to quickly pause over here to see if there are any comments or questions. I know I went very quickly across this. The only other slide that I really have is the next steps, where I wanted to put a little bit more focus on some feedback that we needed from you folks on all these concepts that we just discussed.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rahul. Yeah, and just to add a little bit of more color on the outcomes of this whole process. Remember, the purpose here is to fill in some of the gaps that we weren't able to really identify in the capacity expansion model. We did not have the model endogenously considering a whole host of bulk transfer options endogenously within the model and optimizing that. So we're trying to identify, based on all those results and feedback from stakeholders, what are some areas of the grid that could be updated? What is the existing power flow, the power flow in the future? What are all the constraints, and how could you theoretically unbottle those constraints, and what would that do? The purpose of doing this is so that we have a list of options, basically a shopping list of potential bulk upgrades that can then be input into the optimization in stage 5 to let the model make some decisions about which ones of these are actually adding more value than others, or actually useful in terms of helping the model hit its targets more effectively and cheaply than only relying on local transmission needs, for example. So that's kind of the ultimate goal here, is to try to get something that can work into the stage 5 modeling. And we have a couple of questions in the chat. Babatunde, you want to start?
Yeah, thanks. And I think you touched on answered part of my question, and I was thinking about priority. If you have to choose which of these to prioritize over others, and I see a common trend. I mean, to these two parts, one, and that's from G to J. Do you think there's going to be a value in just studying that separately to also see if it's, if you prioritizing this section of these solutions?
Rahul, you want to answer that, or John?
Is that clear?
Yeah,
you're asking if we've looked at just the G to J component individually, and
Yes.
whether there would be value in doing that. So Rahul, you want to respond to that? I may follow up.
No, sure. No, that's a great question again, Babatunde. And I think from some of the initial analysis that was done, fully recognizing that, the analysis was really just to design transmission concepts. When you look at where most of the constraints are prominently showing up to really deliver a lot of the renewables, we've been seeing most of the constraints really being along the pathway of getting it into zone G. But that's not to say that there is not going to be a value in a G to J individual type of analysis. But so far, the work that has been done has been pointing in a direction that it's mostly getting it into zone G. When you consider not just more of the local constraints, but also the bulk constraints and the transfer interface limitations. Anything to add to that?
No, and just the only thing I'd add is something I was saying to Shadab earlier, and that is the difference between 2035, 2040, and 2050.
Yeah, absolutely.
The longer you go, the more binding those downstate into downstate constraints become. And so in those later stages, like 2042, if we did all of this with everything in 2042, that G to J interface explicitly would be more binding than it would be when we're looking at these kind of nearer term optimizations. And so that's something that we will continue to expand on, because we know in the long term, that's something that's really good to look at. And in everything we're doing now, we want to make sure we're keeping that in mind. Back to Shadab's point about, expandability and building for the future. We don't want to make decisions today that prevent us from doing the really most cost-effective things in the future too. Okay, right before we go to Radhika, we have a question written in the chat from Chris. Are we contemplating 345 AC, or are we also looking at DC or higher voltage AC lines?
So Rahul, can you go to the next step slide for me to address that?
Absolutely.
So as I noted at the outset today, we were presenting things at a pretty conceptual level, meaning that we have identified sets of constraints that we think are likely there to be value in at least looking at solutions to address. But we have not nailed down cost estimates or even fully refined solution assumptions for that, meaning that while the Quanta team has looked at things that would be viable, we are not yet married to a specific technology. I will also say, in the purposes of this exercise, I don't imagine that an outcome would be build this specific technology. It would be under this there is value in increasing this bulk transfer pathway, and here is evidence for doing that the commission could consider. And then in defining a need, the commission could be based on evidence before them, identify technological limitations that may be applicable, or leave that more open so that through that competitive process, developers could have proposed technologies to meet the defined need in a variety of ways, as we've seen in prior cycles where the public policy transmission planning process has been leveraged.
Thanks, John.
Chris, hopefully that answers your question. Yep.
Okay. Go ahead, Radhika.
I have a question on the similar to the prior question on the what type. So John, when you say bulk solutions, is it 230 kV and above?
No. I mean, I think that the commission has been consistent in how they've presented. It's really about increasing transfers either across zones or across utility territories, and it's not limited to just a voltage class definition. So, and then that is why, as Rahul noted at the beginning, we looked at constraints 100 kV and above, even though in other ways that folks look at the bulk system, they may not start that far down. But we need to understand both interplay with the local solutions being developed by the utilities, and we also need to understand the full impact on those transfers. So this could mean it could be looking at, there could be components of a need we define that would involve potentially reinforcing existing elements below 200 kV. It could involve adding new pathways above 200 kV. I just want to be really clear here that when we're saying bulk, we're not limiting it to a specific voltage class definition, but really focusing on the transferability across the system in accordance with the commission's previous interpretations.
Is the plan for like the final steps of this bulk analysis to include this is the solution, which could be a combination of different voltage levels, as you noted, and the local solution that this bulk solution competes with or could be combined with? So how do you represent, or how will this be represented between bulk solutions that you are looking at versus local solutions? Some could be candidates of the same need, some could be a combination. So will you be defining that?
Well, I think what we are working forward to defining, and part of that process is taking feedback from today's conversation, is again, these are proxy solutions. So we are not going to come out with a definition of you must build exactly this type of project from this point to this point. That would likely be over definition. But of course, we have to have a project that we can test. And so how would that manifest itself? We're going to look at what the information we have available from the utilities to consider as we refine the solutions. We can take feedback from the rest of EPPAC on things that we may want to consider. And certainly we will have something that we put in a model to identify what the actual increase in transfer capability and to get high level cost assumptions for would look like. And then that goes itself into the stage 5 analysis, where really what will be looking like is you can get this much increase in transfer across these zones for this cost. It's not going to take that specific modeling feedback, and that comparison with the local projects would be in that stage 5 analysis. The model will be able to select local projects and or bulk projects. And so if the same needs are being met by both, we would, ideally the model would be selecting between them, but we are also working to ensure there's not conflict and where possible potential synergy with the information available to us ahead of time.
Hey, John, it's Liz. Just for sensitivity, the commission doesn't designate bulk projects. It designates bulk needs to be addressed by the NISO through the public policy process. It's needs, not specific projects.
Thank you, Liz. I was clumsily attempting to get there as part of
it's tricky. It's tricky.
Yeah. So and that's part of what I was getting at. We would not be putting, the reason these have been referred to as proxies consistently is that very fact. We are looking to inform a commission decision as to whether or not there is value in them declaring a need, which then out of that process would come the specific bulk solutions that would be built in the end. We're looking to identify proxies that help shape the potential benefits that such projects would have to inform whether or not the commission would make the decision to declare a need.
Will you be showing as part of like the rationale and the justification for those bulk solutions, bulk idea solutions, will you be sharing what constraints are being, local constraints might be addressed and plus transfer capability?
What so we've been, Radhika, we've been pretty cautious about this, and the reason, Rahul, can you go back up to one of the slides where you've shown constraints? So we have, this is an example here where a number of constrained facilities have been highlighted and high-level descriptions of the constraints have been provided. We were sensitive about providing more detail in this forum because the information's public and we need to be cautious about CEII information. So I think we're happy to provide information about constraints up to the point where we would not be coming up against the CEII issues, at least in anything that would be made public. But I think it's another thing I'm happy to follow up on offline if there's an information that you're specifically looking for in terms of the list of constraints that we're looking at. I think, within those bounds, we can look at providing that information, but we have tried to walk a fine line here and not incidentally give away anything CEII. I think maybe a good way to put it is up to the level you might see in an ISO stakeholder meeting. I think we'd be happy to provide. Beyond that, any detailed constraints that you would not get access to publicly normally, I'm not sure that we would be able to provide, at least in this group where it's made public.
Yeah, and I understand the point on like CII data. What's actually on my mind is more like how will the possible I'm concerned that a 345 kV might show up as something more expensive, but in that comparison, and you also have one estimate, like bulk solutions will have like high level estimates versus array-based solutions for local solutions. So you have a lot more uncertainty on the bulk solutions by design of the process. And if we are also not representing how the bulk solution could address some local constraints plus, maybe not all, but some plus transfer capability, I'm just not seeing how a bulk solution could be put forward if it's not clear, like its benefit, if its benefits are not clearly stated and maybe even quantified to some extent,
Well, and
the
I think
way a local solution would be.
well, and I mean, I'll let the utilities speak to how the local solutions will be represented in further modeling, but again, we are not going to be proposing a bulk solution as part of this process. We're going to be providing the commission with information to potentially declare a need. And so within that, yes, we have some challenges potentially in with the level of precision in the models themselves. But we do have the ability to communicate with, to the commission other information as to the types of constraints that we see as potentially being addressed with some of these proxy solutions, to the extent that that would help them make a determination of need one way or the other. So I don't think that we are simply limited to the model picking A or B. That's a part of the process, but there's additional information that can be considered in defining these needs. And I don't think it would be fair to say that the state nor the utilities are blind to the idea that there are potential synergies or replacements between these projects. And so to the extent that there's information that they are able to share with us to incorporate, we are taking that into account.
Thanks, John.
And one other question, and I see there are other hands raised, so we'll be quick. I understand the point on this will inform potentially a PPTN, and is the commission will make that determination. Previously, we discussed about the timeline and how needs on the shorter term will be prioritized. However, like this process, like the commission won't make a determination on the CGPP until probably late next year. I don't know, or like early 2027, but for sure probably later 2026. No, based on where we are with the process. And then a PPTN would be another 2 to 3. I don't know. I don't remember exactly the timeline, but it seems like we are at least possibly 3 to 4 years before a solution will be approved, maybe even more by the board. So that's like late 2020s. So it kind of like contradicts the point of we want to focus on the short term, because the way, like the timelines that just push us for a solution, like you can even build something or permit for another 10 years after a solution is approved. So effectively we are more like late 2030s, solutions here.
Right.
At
And I
least on
think
the bulk
the
side.
clarification there is that we're trying to prioritize the realistic near-term solutions, not the modeled near-term solutions. So in the model, we're hitting like 9 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2033 or 2035. We're hitting 70 by 2030. And so in the modeled results that we're putting in here for the near term in 2030 and 2035, based on everything we've seen over the last 2 years, from the biennial review to the state energy plan and a lot of the updates that we're getting from the developers and from the NISO, it's very unlikely that 70 by 30 gets hit in 2030. It's very unlikely that the 9 gigawatts of offshore wind happens by 2035. And so those quote unquote, need drivers, those are likely later than the dates that we're using here. So the near term that we're saying in 2035 in the real world might actually be closer to 2040 than to 2030. And so we're trying to like kind of split the results in that way, where we're bringing the reality to this, but still using as many of the modeled results, because they've been vetted by you all before. We know what it's generally looked like, and we want to know what the needs of the system are to hit 70%. But just because the model says it's happening in 2030 doesn't mean it's actually happening there in 2030 in reality. It might be 2033 or beyond, but we still want to know that now. And that is a quote unquote near-term solution that we might be able to identify this year, act on next year, solicit and start developing the following year. But you're right that we are constrained by administrative timelines, and there's not much we can do about that, but we're gonna move as quickly as we can on the ones that are really important.
I'll make a note, it's Liz, we did try to put some priorities for these types of projects in the regulations implementing the RAPID Act.
Okay, Paul, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thanks, Skylar. Yeah, again, I think great analysis. I don't think there's any real surprises here. I guess this question's for John. I guess, John, do you see any synergies here with the interregional RFI, especially with where some of these potential corridors are? Not to complicate that.
I am going to try to gracefully punt that question, Paul. In that we have not, the RFI from the Northeast States Collaborative is, I would view as entirely separate from the work on CGPP and related proceedings. We have yet to see responses, so me commenting on the specifics of any wouldn't be possible, but I imagine that if there are responses to that RFI that like DPS staff and in consultation with NYSERDA saw as potentially informative to some of our other work, that we would certainly consider that. And I imagine that there would also be ways in which, if appropriate, something could be included for the commission's consideration. But I really just want to reiterate, we're not blind to information that we get via different processes, but they're totally unconnected at this point.
Understood. Thanks.
Perfect. No other questions, just very quickly. I know we're almost up on time. Just wanted to reiterate what John had mentioned earlier on the next steps. Really looking for some feedback and really appreciated by September 25th to keep us all in timeline. Based on everything that we've discussed and looking at the feedback we receive, we'll continue to refine the bulk solutions and move on to the process of developing cost estimates, fully recognizing all of the nuances around, this being more of a needs assessment than being a specific solution assessment, mostly from the perspective of providing guiding information is how we're really thinking about all of this, and also finalizing the solutions for stage 5 analysis. Anything more to add, Skylar and John? If not, that's the last slide I have from my end, and I'm going to stop sharing.
Just one thing, the feedback can be provided in writing to the EPPAC email address or to my email address. They're both in the chat.
Perfect. Thank you, Skylar. I'm going to stop presenting. Thanks again, everyone, for your time.
Thanks, Rahul. And there's more to come on that. There'll be future EPPAC meetings where we can respond to that feedback and bring back additional results. So this is not the last time we'll be able to engage on that. So now that we've kind of wrapped up that first part of the presentation, I wanted to be able to move over to the utilities presentation to give an update on stages 3 and 4 work and some updates on what's going to be happening in the near future on their work streams. So I think I'm turning it over to Jeff.
Yes, good morning, or good afternoon, sorry. Can you see a slide deck?
I can see your WebEx screen.
Sorry, let's try again. How about now?
There it is.
Okay. So hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Marr from National Grid here on behalf of the Joint Utilities to give a little bit of an update on what we've been doing here in the later stages of CGPP, I guess I would say. So our agenda for today is kind of recap where we are for stage 3, what we started for stage 4, and then discuss some of what we're already doing to try to kick off stage 5 as soon as possible. I'm not going to drain this slide. I think we'll touch on all of these as we go through these couple of slides we have today. So quick recap. The JU are working on CGPP stages 3 and 4 in parallel, right? So you can see here from these little bars. The beginning of stage 3 was really about doing the planning studies and then kicking off a tremendous amount of engineering work to review potential solutions, determine scope, schedule, feasibility, cost, all that stuff. So as we've started to move into more of the engineering work, we've also started doing some of the stage 4 review. The goal here is to wrap up stage 3 by November and then formally kick off stage 5. Stage 4, the goal is to have stage 4 as complete as possible before stage 5 starts, but we're right now in the interest of compressing the schedule as much as possible, we are expecting that stage 4 probably will overlap a little bit with stage 5. Okay, so stage 3, one of the updates here we wanted to bring to this group just for awareness is this idea that we've introduced of what we're calling category 1 and category 2. So we're actively working on the solution development. And as we reviewed the needs and started to understand the solutions, we started realizing that there's really kind of 2 buckets of projects. So for category 1, we viewed these projects as something that the model is going to need to see in service by around 2035. So our intention is that with the category 1 projects, what we'll be proposing in the final report for CGPP is a lot of detail about these projects, very specific in terms of engineering, the costs, the timelines. That's really been the primary focus of a lot of what we're doing in stage 3 is these category 1 projects. For category 2 projects, what we're seeing is that these projects are likely needed under a longer term basis, after 2035. So we believe that at this point that the next cycle of CGPP, these projects could be approved and still enter service on a timeline when the resource is needed. So for the category 2 projects, for any of those that we'll be including in the final report, what we'll be providing is kind of preliminary or planning grade estimates. So not quite as detailed in scope, schedule, or cost, still doing to the extent possible, sharing some information about what we think that will look like, but less detail compared to category 1. Questions about what we're doing in stage 3? Okay. What about stage 4? Stage 4 is really all about collaboration.
Actually, hey, Jeff.
Sorry, sorry, I just got one in the chat. If you want to, Radhika raised her hand, and then we might have another one as well.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. I have a question on the criteria used for defining or applying this category 1 and 2 upgrade or need definition.
It's really more about when we see the model needing the project. There could also be an eventuality where when we start doing the engineering work, we realize that there's just no way to get that project in service on that timeline. So it could be either of those two. So if the modeling work is suggesting the problem or project is needed, based on the generation build out that came out of stage 1 and the studies being done in stage 3, we are looking at 2030, 2035, or 2035 and 2040 is the 2042, excuse me, 2035 and 2042 are the primary years that we're looking at within stage 3. So we would be able to tell if the need was materializing based on those assumptions in 2035 or 2042.
Someone mentioned right sizing earlier. Is that part of, is that something that you integrate as well when you define if something is category 1 or 2?
Yep, we are always looking to maximize essentially the headroom that projects create. So if there is a way to modify a scope, increase a wire size, for an example, maybe extend a project, you know, a little bit further from one station to another, if those modifications would add significant headroom, we would always be looking to do that.
Thank you.
Sorry, I can't see the screen, so.
Yep, we have Babatunde is next.
Yeah, thank you. Will the bulk need also be classified under the same category 1 and category 2? If not, do you think there's going to be a value to do that?
I don't think that's a question for the JU. I think that's a question for NYSERDA.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, would the bulk need that I mean, some of the solutions we just discussed, would they be classified under category 1 and category 2? If not, do you think there's going to be value to do that?
There currently haven't been any plans to categorize in this way, although we can certainly think about it. Again, the bulk process is a little bit different. I think what Jeff is laying out here is the utilities thinking around how they're prioritizing some of the local projects that they've identified to address the needs they've seen in their analyses. And those would go before the commission for their specific consideration. The bulk process is a little different, in which we'd be providing the commission with information so that they could determine whether or not to declare a need itself and then identify the specific projects. So I don't think that all of the impetus between this differentiation necessarily applies to the bulk, but we can certainly think about whether there's a subset of it that might be useful in informing the commission.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and the reason I asked that is based on my understanding, part of the bulk need is going to be feeding into stage 5, and then we're also going to be having some of this feed into stage 5 as well. And I'm trying to see how do we reconcile all these different options if the time frame is actually different. Perhaps I'm not sure if I understand the process well, but that's the way I understand it at this time.
Yeah, I think the goal is just for there to be, as I think I described earlier, a shopping list of bulk needs, and that goes for local too. We're trying to develop the shopping list of potential local solutions that can go into that stage 5 model, and they're all going to be developed in terms of like cost for the value, so dollars per kilowatt of capability added, and so they'll all be on that same playing field. I think the JU are kind of presenting in these categories so that as we move through the rest of the process, the category 1 projects are things that they've already been able to evaluate and prioritize conceptually. And so those can get, as they move through the stage 5 work and the stage 6 report, they can get a little bit more attention because those might be the ones that are already seem more near term and more needed. And those ones can be developed in terms of more detail, you know, rate case quality estimates, more time spent engineering and looking at the costs and timelines so that the commission has better information about those. But in terms of the stage 4 and stage 5 work, we're still just trying to get all of these things at the same point so they're all on a level playing field in the stage 5 modeling. Hey, Bill, go ahead.
Hi, Jeff. Bill Acker, Best. I just wanted to get a little more texture on where you are and kind of the the workflow process on the needs assessment and the development of the initial development of solutions. So you've been doing power flow analysis of all the different needs assessments, and you're trying to create solutions. Can you give us just a little more texture on where you are in that whole thing, and then I want to kind of get a little more understanding on the kind of breadth of the solution development process.
Sure. So good question, because I think people really underappreciate the amount of engineering that's going into these solutions. Where we have teams of people, protection engineers, station engineers, line engineers. We have people that are familiar with permitting requirements, environmental requirements. Where we have teams of people right now that are actively working to make sure that the projects that we're looking at are feasible, understand the cost, understand the schedule that we could implement these projects under, right? So there's a lot of effort going in to develop these. And so when I look at like stage 3, if I was to say stage 3 was 12 months, let's say, I would say a lot of the planning work is really front end loaded, where we're trying to identify those needs and understand potential needs across the scenarios. And then we start kicking off a lot of that engineering work. So we start, it's easy. I always say it's easy for a planner to draw a line on a map. It's easy to say, let's build a line from A to B, or reconductor a line, or build a station, whatever it is. But the true effort is really in those engineering teams, again, with the feasibility, schedule, scope, cost. So those teams have been working with the planning teams, like really iterating on potential solutions. For example, we say, let's build a new substation. And our engineering team comes back and after spending what could be, 2 months working on that, they come back and say that solution is just not feasible. We can't get a station in this pocket of the system or in that very specific geographic area that would achieve what you're trying to do with this from your planning study. So we've been iterating with those teams. We handed off a lot of information, probably by the halfway point through CGPP, and then we've been iterating and working with our engineering teams through the back half of like stage 3 is really what we're doing. So I would say as we're kind of sprinting towards the end, the hopeful end or schedule end of stage 3, most of the work now is with our engineering teams to figure out, again, the feasibility schedule, scope, cost stuff.
So I mean, I certainly appreciate this enormous undertaking. For the needs assessment part, you just walking through that part, how you've identified, even before you got to the build a new substation here, you're doing power flow analysis across all of the with all of the scenarios that have been laid out here. Is that now complete? Where does that stand? Is it done for each of the scenarios? Where does that all stand?
I don't want to say it's complete. I think we're still trying to make sure we understand what's happening and make sure that that we have identified all the needs that make sense, where they are, how they're behaving in the system. So those planning studies are ongoing. We think that those are going to continue even into stage 4. We're anticipating to do some additional planning studies. So I wouldn't say they're complete, but we did enough work to get our engineering teams moving on potential solutions.
Are you going to end up tying those back to the scenarios? I guess what I'm interested in is, we have these multiple different scenarios and sensitivities, and we might have a need here for one, there for another, or we may have the need, at one point for same thing for many of them, but not for another one. Will there be a report out or any tying that all together?
I think what we're seeing is, and I think Skylar mentioned this before, for especially for the 2035 timeframe, a lot of the output from stage 1 look very, very similar. So as we develop solutions, especially for that 2035 timeframe, we think that the solutions were mostly make sense across all the scenarios. Now, in some instances, we might see like, let's say an area in one scenario, we see the need for one project, but in that same area, we might see that one project still makes sense, and then we may propose to build on top of that with a second project, right? So we kind of see these mostly as blocks that you can build upon as we go across these areas. So what we may end up doing in stage 5, and we're still kind of working through this, we'll talk about that in a minute, is we may take like everything that we see, again, maybe credit to Skylar, I think you maybe said a laundry list. Like we may take like all of the projects we see across all of the scenarios, and we'll shove them all into stage 5 and see what the model likes and doesn't like.
So when you say all of the projects, you'll have a suite of needs assessments for each of those scenarios, and then you'll have a suite of projects of solutions that would address those, and you'd be shoving all those solutions into stage 5. Once again, I'm really trying to tease out. We had one scenario which is a low T&D impact scenario, for instance. Is that actually showing a difference in T&D impact? Those kinds of questions.
I think you can see that from the stage 1 results, right? In the stage 1 results, I think when I look across, we did what, 3, really you can almost say 4 different scenarios, and then we did like 10 sensitivities. When I look across all of the very interesting work that was done in stage 1, especially for 2035, I see a lot of similarities. So from that, I would just say that what's likely to be needed to address any of those scenarios is very similar.
So just to be clear then, are you not modeling each of the scenarios separately because you believe they're similar enough that you don't need to?
We've been doing a lot of work to understand that. I think we're still doing that work to understand that. But me personally, from the work I've done, I've seen basically the same results across a lot of the different analysis that we've done.
Okay, and I'm trying to remember the numbers. I remember for the low T&D impact, I know the energy storage was higher in 2040, like 20 gigawatts versus 16 gigawatts for things like that. I'm not sure how much difference in 35. So I guess I'm not arguing that it would be different, but it's good to clarify and be clear on that. Let me also dig in for a second on the solution development, and what solution suite was going on the table in this development. And I know we talked a little bit about the solution development in 3, and then the honing and later in 5. But for get solutions, energy storage and other things, when and how are they being considered now in the process?
We're looking for any solution that would meet the need. And I think we've been asked, when we get to the stage 6, when we file our report, we've been asked to describe how we considered advanced technologies and kind of give some sense of how we applied that. We've been working with the ATWG to understand what the benefits of some of these technologies are and how they could support policy achievement. So we are actively looking at all solutions. Any solution that we have identified that could meet the need, those are the solutions being evaluated.
Okay, and then what information is going to be shared with both the needs assessment and the solution development? I guess with the EPPAC group and I guess more broadly.
We're still working on that to figure out what the appropriate forum is and how much information we can share. There are some concerns about confidentiality, CEII, to the extent I think ultimately we will get to a stage 6 report. Everything that we can share will be shared in stage 6 in the final report. My understanding is there will be a comment period for interested parties. I think we're just still working on to what extent we can share earlier than the final report.
Yep. Yeah, and I think we've certainly had these conversations, and we understand the challenges of CEII and the like. But I will reiterate that we'd be much better off having people's comments earlier rather than having a big fight about it after you file the report. So I think it's definitely helpful the more you can share earlier.
Okay.
Right, that was the last hand in the chat.
Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about stage 4. So stage 4, again, the idea here in stage 4 is collaboration. So what we're doing or are planning on doing, have been doing here in stage 4 is the joint utilities are continuing to discuss opportunities for cooperation. So as we search for those needs, sharing with our neighboring utilities what we see and looking for opportunities where instead of doing 2 projects, maybe we can do 1 project, or maybe 1 project, you know, we want to select the best possible solutions that will go forward in the process. So kind of understanding, you know, is there benefits of one over the other if they're addressing the same need? You know, also looking for, you know, synergies. Can we both propose those same types of, or excuse me, both propose projects that would synergize together and provide greater benefits? We're also looking to make sure that there are no negative impacts. We want to make sure that one project in one area is not having a negative impact on another utility's proposed project. You know, a big area for this, to be blunt, is power flow control. Like sometimes when you put power flow control, it pushes power off of your system and may push power onto someone else's system. So making sure that we're not having a negative impact on our neighbors is also a part of this. So what have we been doing? We've been meeting. We've been meeting pretty much through the entirety of CGPP on a regular basis to discuss our progress. But we've also started having some dedicated meetings, either as a JU to talk about what we're seeing, or having like peer-to-peer meetings. So maybe just 2 utilities that have potential overlap will be meeting to discuss what we've been seeing. The goal for what we're working on here in stage 4 is to be to a point where we can start sharing with each other some potential projects that our engineers are working on, and sharing that modeling information. So when we share that modeling information, the intent will be that each utility will perform system analysis with the proposed CGPP projects in the models, so that we can see how other utilities projects would be interacting with our system. Again, if we see those interactions and see that they could potentially be adverse impacts, we may modify projects, we may cancel projects. This is what we'll be searching for in stage 4, is really how those different pieces will be interacting with each other. Questions on stage 4?
Nothing at the moment.
Okay, so what's left for CGPP? That would be stage 5 and stage 6.
Hey, Jeff, I'm sorry, just to fill out again, a real simple question for you. I lost track of the timing you said. You said 3 wrapping up by November. What's timing on 4 now?
So there's overlap. Again, we have been having these conversations already. So we've been sharing potential needs, sharing potential solutions, getting ready to share more of the modeling information. So the hope is that we're done by November-ish timeframe, but this one may bleed a little bit into stage 5 as we finish up that work.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so again, what's left? 2 things left, right? Stage 5. So what we're doing right now is we're, in the interest of keeping the schedule as compressed as possible, we're starting some pre-work. So the joint utilities are working with DPS staff, NYSERDA, and NYSO to test the capacity expansion model. The idea here is that we'll kind of revisit the modeling that was done in stage 1 and incorporate the projects, whether they be these local projects or the bulk projects that were presented earlier. And we will be incorporating this work into the model and helping the model, and is going to, the hope is that this model is going to help us understand the value or priority of these projects. So what we've done so far is created sample projects, and we're working with the NYSO to see how the model will be reacting to these sample projects. And, you know, some of these sample projects were picked purely to stress test the model. Like, let's see what happens. So they don't necessarily represent, or they don't represent real projects. We'll be transmitting those real projects to the NYSO at the end of stage 3, once we're done, which again, we're targeting for November. So the hope is that once we have these real projects, the model will already have been tested. We'll know exactly what we have to input, and the stage 5 assessments will be able to proceed smoothly based on this pre-work. We're also working on the report. So stage 6, again, the CGPP culminates with a report. We're starting to draft sections of this report. A lot of work has been done over the last, I'm not even sure what it has been, almost 2 years now. We kind of got a jump start before January. So I'd say about 2 years now, we've done a tremendous amount of work, discussions, engagement here through this portion of CGPP so far. So we want to try to start incorporating that into the report that will ultimately be filed. I don't think there's much more to say on that with, we're drafting. And then the final point we just want to raise here is some clarity on the calendar. So again, we are trying to compress the schedule, keep to the schedule as much as possible. At this point, I think the order originally called for like the first business day in January was the target for CGPP to be the cycle 1 to be finished. We at this point expect that we will not hit that date. We will be filing an extension request, but there's a lot of uncertainty again with how stage 5 is going to go. So until we get stage 5 underway, we're delaying the actual request so we can have a better idea of how much additional time we will need. At this point, we're anticipating to file that request in December. Okay, I think that covers everything I wanted to mention here. Are there any final questions?
Go ahead, Radhika.
Sorry, I was double muted. I have 2 questions on the modeling in stage 5. Will there be any SCAD modeling done by New York ISO, or just capacity expansion modeling?
Just capacity expansion modeling.
And how will this, like, how will you compare upgrades when they are more like in the same zone and that's not captured in the capacity expansion model because the model is zonal?
Yep, that's the big thing that we're working on. Right now, we think we're going to be relying on headroom. So looking at the cost of headroom in each zone and giving that as a modeling input. We did give that information as a placeholder in stage 1. Right? So in stage 1, there was an assumption that the more and more headroom you built in a zone, the more and more generation you built in a zone, there would have to be corresponding headroom that went with that. And there was some assumptions about how the cost of that headroom would escalate. So what we have here in stage 5 is an opportunity to replace that kind of like generic assumption for headroom with actual projects and actual headroom that those projects create. And then we can see how the different utilities across different zones are able to produce headroom at different costs. And the hope is that we will be able to see the model respond to that headroom and potentially change the generation build out.
But sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just,
Yeah.
I'm a little confused. And thank you, Rana, for asking this question. I guess, I mean, headroom with the capacity expansion model, to me, doesn't really validate that the solution set's meeting the needs. Is there some modeling here that I'm missing?
No, I think you can go back and read the original proposal for CGPP, read the commission order. I think this was always envisioned how the modeling would work in stage 5.
Okay, and there's going to be sufficient power flow modeling before that that's going to validate that they all meet the needs?
I guess I'm not sure what you mean by meet the needs.
So I mean, obviously, it's challenging when you don't know exactly where everything lands and all that. But you've got a picture of a capacity expansion. We're looking for a set of solutions that is going to give us a functional grid in the future with that. And it seems like there's a layer of texture here that may be getting missed in this. And how do I get comfortable with that?
We've had quite a lot of conversations about capacity expansion model here at EPPAC. Also, at lots of NISO stakeholder meetings. There are some potential downsides with capacity expansion modeling for sure. Right? They're not going to always do a perfect job at identifying, for example, reliability needs, but there is reliability incorporated into the model, and locational capacity requirements for those resources to maintain reliability. But at the end of the day, this modeling is as good as it can be given what it's trying to do, right? Which is trying to achieve this mix of generation that would get us towards policy achievement. And can we always say with 100% certainty that we've covered every possible conceivable issue, like ramp rates or resource adequacy down to the nearest 2 megawatts? No, capacity expansion doesn't work at that granular of a level. What we're trying to do here is get us as close to a system that can achieve policy as possible. So I think that, again, I think capacity expansion modeling was essentially something that was always assumed in the CGPP. So if you go back even to some of the initiating orders from the commission long before we even called it CGPP, I think the idea of having this least cost planning assessment and using capacity expansion modeling to get to that least cost planning assessment was a requirement of the order. So I think that's how we as the JU have been proceeding through this entire process.
Okay, and I jumped in front of Radhika, so I thought I had a quick question. Radhika, go ahead and go back to this.
No, I'm also like a little puzzled or confused about this, because it seems like, or at the minimum, I think we need, at which point do you think you can share more information about the top needs identified? Because it just seems like right now it's going into a possibly black box, and we are hearing that the black box is not going to be modeled in details in the stage 5. I was pretty certain that there was a SCID modeling requirement as well, but I'm possibly very wrong on that. But that's what I thought, that like New York ISO will also do a SCID analysis in addition to the capacity expansion modeling. And it just so that, like, that's one question, and I can go back myself and look after this meeting if that's a requirement. But it just there are a lot of like transmission planning reports that are made available in other jurisdictions with detailed information. It won't be like bus numbers with monitor and contingent element, but a good number of information has always been released. So it will be good, and I don't see why it couldn't be offered to see at least like the top 5 needs, or top like what has been identified to date at some point sooner versus at the end of the stage 3 or 4, or just to understand like those are the needs that you are looking at in terms of solutions. Otherwise, it seems like we are just going like with no information until the report is out.
I think at this point, or I guess it was always envisioned that the prioritization would occur within stage 5 and be done by the capacity expansion modeling. So that's the intention, is to use the model for that purposes and then report out in the final report. And then I think, to be honest, that one of the barriers to sharing information is just how time consuming it is to bring all that together. We are on a full out sprint in order to get CGPP cycle 1 wrapped up as soon as possible. We are trying our best. There is just a lot of information at this point across all the different utilities. So that's why we're still looking to see what is the best way that we can share information. So we're still working on that while trying to make sure that we don't delay any of the stages of CGPP.
I understand that, but it can be like a simply like top 3 needs. Those are the top 3 constraints we are seeing, and we are looking at solution for those ones. I think at the minimum, like your highest
Well,
needs.
again, we don't prioritize the model. The capacity expansion model in stage 5 will prioritize.
Yes, I understand, but if those local solutions are not being, I'm not clear how local solutions are going to be prioritized in stage 5 when they are. How are you providing the information in a way that stage 5 will prioritize those local solutions?
Remember that stage 5 in the capacity expansion model, right? It is a zonal model, and the main characteristics of the local system that we're using in the capacity expansion model is headroom. So we're trying to use headroom to describe how the local system is constrained.
So the solutions that create the biggest headroom will be prioritized in stage 5.
Possibly, but it also matters like how much the generation costs. So as you look across the zones, right, if generation within zone X is 5 times more expensive than generation in zone Y, then the model will factor that into how it sees the headroom evolving.
The generation differences are not that material.
Sure, and perhaps neither will the headroom.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm speaking just on my own, like on behalf of AC New York, but I think more transparency on the system needs and the solutions that you are going to share with New York ISO for stage 5 modeling would be beneficial to be shared with more transparency in a fashion that is compliant with CII requirements, but I think there should be some transparency on what you are seeing as top needs. At least I would appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thanks for the comment. We'll take it back.
Keith, did you want to follow up on something? I saw you throw your hand up when we were talking about more NISO modeling.
Yeah, excellent catch of the timing there, Skylar. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify one point. So, the NISO and our role in this is really to support the modeling work and the efforts as prescribed by the joint utilities and the CGPP order. So I think I heard Radhika mention something. I think the term was SCED. So when I hear that, I think of power flow analysis, like a Terra type of option, security constrained economic dispatch. That is, I believe that would be that type of analysis is something that's being captured by the joint utilities and not the NISO in this process. If that's what you're referring to, the Terra option of security constrained economic dispatch, or if you were meaning something else, I wasn't quite sure there.
Keith, I was more referring to like an 8760, call it ProMod, or I don't know. I don't remember what New York ISO is using. I don't remember what but more like an 8760, 8760 SCED tool.
Yeah, no,
Plan or U-plan type, ProMod type.
Yep, no, neither of those. Our efforts on this primarily are focused on the capacity expansion, which is the simplified bubble and pipe type of model with representative days that are weighted that give kind of a pseudo 8760, and it's really looking to achieve certain various different targets and things like that. But it's a far from, I think, what you're specifically asking about, Radhika.
Okay, thank you. I will go back to the order too. That I don't know, somehow we were under the impression that there will be some sort of like more detailed congestion analysis being done using more tool like grid view or UPlan or ProMod, but I'm definitely wrong on this then.
Yeah, always good to reread that. You know, some of the things that myself, Radhika, that have been brought up today, I was like, oh, I've got to reread the order to refresh myself on some of the stuff. So yeah, thanks for calling that out.
Thank you.
Question. Yeah, I just wanted to confirm I heard this right. Intrazonal congestion will not be captured in the stage 5 model. Is that correct?
So the stage 5 model is a pipe and bubble model. The pipes represent the transfers between the zones, and we're using headroom as a proxy to represent the system constraints within the bubbles.
Okay, and I'm trying to tie that to what you're doing in stage 4. In stage 4, you alluded to the fact that each of it appears that in stage 4, that's where all the utilities come together and compare model and compare result. Is that right? Or is that done in stage 5?
That is part of stage 4, correct.
Okay. And then you have a final solution which now goes into stage 5.
No, we have a suite of potential projects that will go into stage 5.
Okay.
And the capacity expansion model will review the need and prioritize across that portfolio.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, I gave it a 5-second count, and I'll give it another 3 seconds here to see if anything. We have just like 1 more minute left, so I'm probably going to wrap it up here. Thanks, folks. This was, I think, a really informative. I know it had been a little while, so it was good to get everybody back together and answer as many questions as we could today. As we mentioned before, if you have questions about either of the presentations, feel free to send them to the EPPAC email address, epac@dps.ny.gov, or to myself. And we'd be happy to respond to those. And we'll also be coming back in future EPPAC meetings to give more information and take more questions. So thanks for joining today, and we'll be in touch very soon. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.